I wish I liked this. Hey guys, welcome back. Our Book of the Month poll winner for June is The Wishing Game. Thank you to everyone who voted. If you missed the poll, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss next month's vote. Now, this is a debut by Meg Schaefer, and admittedly, before this was a Book of the Month pick, I had no idea about this book. I've heard nothing. I didn't recognize the book name or the cover or the author. I was completely in the dark, and I still can't really even figure out what book genre this is. Book of the Month said contemporary fiction, but Goodreads says fantasy, romance, magical realism. All of the bases are getting covered, apparently. Personally, I would agree that this is more of a contemporary fiction genre, just because for the fantasy or magical realism, there was none, and then also the romance aspect was lame. So I'm not counting it as a romance type book. Now, for the synopsis of the book, one of our main characters is Lucy. She is a 26-year-old teacher's aide who wants to adopt this 7-year-old foster child in the school where she works. In order to do this, she needs to be more financially secure. So she's kind of working on that. We also have Hugo, who was the illustrator for the children's books by the author Jack. Now, Jack and Hugo live on this little secluded island by Maine, and it's called Clock Island. In the past 6 years or so, Jack has become a recluse. He doesn't write anymore, and Hugo basically is there to look after him. Suddenly, Jack has written a new book, and he creates a little contest for some special invited guests to come compete to win the one and only copy of his new manuscript. And it's pretty implied that whoever gets the manuscript can sell it to whoever they want for a large sum of money. Now, what I thought of the book, spoiler free, I wholeheartedly did not enjoy this book. I'm sorry if you enjoyed this book, but it just so wasn't for me. I found the whole thing to just be rushed and repetitive. The characters were underdeveloped. Lucy's constant talking about how badly she wants to adopt Christopher was her entire personality, and it drove me up a wall. For the book, I see what the author was going for. It was very short. I could see for someone this could be like a nice, quick, little easy, like cozy read. Personally, I just didn't jam with it. Okay, now into the spoilers. So if you have read it or you want the book to be ruined for you, go ahead and keep watching. If you don't want the book to be ruined, then we'll see you later. So the book is split into 5 different parts. We start with part 1, Make a Wish. In this part, we meet Lucy and Christopher. Christopher is the 7-year-old child who is currently in a foster home. The author wants us to believe they have this special connection. Lucy tutors him, and they talk about how much she wants to adopt him. Right off the bat, I was not a big fan of the kid dynamic. I almost felt like Lucy was getting his hopes up. He keeps being like, "When are you going to adopt me?" And she keeps being like, "When I can afford it, bud." But she doesn't make much money. She doesn't have a car. She lives with 3 college roommates. And she meets with a social worker, and basically the social worker is like, "That's not happening. Like, maybe you should stop telling this child that you are going to be adopting him." And Lucy's like, "But I love him." And the social worker's like, "Yeah, well, he needs more than just love. He needs, someone who can support him. And what happens if he gets sick in the middle of the night? You don't have a car to take him to the doctor's office or to go to the pharmacy to get him medicine. Like, you literally have no resources to take care of this person." It was just, it made me incredibly uncomfortable. In the book, Lucy, all she ever talks about is how much she wants to be Christopher's mom. And she discusses this with him. And I just felt like that was crossing a boundary between a teacher's aide and a student. I personally don't think you should be promising this student that you will be his mom. Also, how touchy-feely she was with him was just weirding me out. Yes, I know she wanted to be his mom, but she wasn't. He was a kid at the school she worked at. I don't feel like you should be having him sit on your lap constantly and hugging him and touching him and being like, I'm gonna be your mom, and him being like, sounds great. I just felt like the whole dynamic between them felt so forced, and I just really didn't care for it. Also in part 1, we learn about the famous Clock Island books by Jack, who's the author. Basically, every child at some point has read these books, and it's a very long series, like 60-some books. The premise of the books are children will show up to the magical Clock Island to get their wishes granted by the mastermind. Lucy read these as a child, and now she's passed on the love of these books to Christopher. The book is also from the point of view of Hugo. He is the illustrator of the new editions of these books. 14 years previously, he was selected as the new illustrator. He now lives on Clock Island with Jack, and we initially see him thinking that he needs to move off of Clock Island and kind of get on with his life, but he's really grown to love Jack and he doesn't feel like he can leave him. Then he finds out that Jack is starting some sort of Willy Wonka type contest. So the announcement's on page 50. It took us 50 whole pages of Lucy being like, I need to adopt Christopher, to finally get to the contest of the book. We're still not on the island. Lucy's still trying to figure out how she can adopt this kid. So he announced on his website and he said, my dear readers, I have written a new book, A Wish for Clock Island. There is but one copy in existence, and I plan to give it away to someone very brave, clever, and who knows how to make wishes. Some of my most courageous readers from long ago will be receiving a very special invitation today. You know who you are if you know my answer to this riddle. Why is a raven like a writing desk? Check your mailbox. With love from Clock Island, the mastermind. So Lucy tells Chris that she has been to Clock Island before when she was 13 and she had ran away from home. So she's like, I know the answer to the riddle! So when she was 13, Jack had answered some of her fan mail that she sent him and was like, oh, you know, I need a sidekick. So she decided to run away to his real-life private island. She was there for not very long at all. Basically, he sat her down with some tea. He gave her the answer to this riddle, and then, you know, obviously called the police because, you know, this kid ran away to this secluded island with this old man. So it turns out Jack inadvertently inviting children to the island was not an uncommon occurrence, which is weird, by the way, but also there are no creepy twists with the story. Jack is a good person throughout the book. He's just a bit eccentric. Definitely feels like it could have taken a different twist if this was like a horror or thriller novel, but he's not, and he's actually a really good guy, apparently. So, you know, he's accidentally inviting these children to his island, but for nothing weird. This section ends with Lucy getting her invite to Clock Island for this contest. After part 1, I have to say I was not feeling this book. Like I said before, I was not feeling the whole dynamic of her being obsessed with wanting to adopt this child that she taught. And then also the mindset of Jack releasing this book or holding a contest for someone to win it. Like, all of these side characters were losing their minds about the idea of him having written another book, but I just wasn't very interested. I was like, okay, so he wrote a new book. I don't know what to tell you. I wasn't buying it. Part 2 is Tick-Tock, Welcome to the Clock. Jack and Hugo are getting ready for the contest. We get a tidbit of the past of Hugo flashing back to himself when he was 21, 14 years previous, when he first came to the island to be the illustrator, after he won another one of Jack's contests. At the end of this section, we also get a small flashback of Lucy and Hugo meeting when she first went to the island when she was 13. So Lucy is preparing to go to Clock Island for this 5-day contest. No one knows what the contest is about yet, just that the other people invited are other past children who had run away to Clock Island. So including Lucy, there are a total of 4 contestants who are going to this island. I'm not going to go into who the other contestants are. We really don't learn much about them throughout the book besides what they look like and their current occupations. I didn't find them to be very important to the story, so we're just gonna glide over that. And that's it for part 2. Mainly, I felt like this section was pointless. It was only a handful of chapters. I feel like it did not need to be its own section. Also, at this point in the book, I did not particularly care for either of the main characters, Lucy or Hugo. We keep getting tidbits of obvious trauma that has happened to them in the past. For example, Lucy, her older sister, was sick all throughout their childhood, so Lucy never got any of her parents' love and attention. Now she's estranged from all of them. It also seems like there was at some point, a controlling older boyfriend and maybe a failed pregnancy. And then for Hugo, it's very heavily implied that at some point his younger brother passed away, and he used to have a girlfriend, but not anymore. And those are basically the main cruxes of these characters' personalities, because we will keep revisiting these exact same plot points from their childhoods or their pasts over and over and over and over and over again. I feel like all the author would ever have these characters think about is like their pasts, like constantly Lucy being like, my parents hated me, and then Hugo being like, my girlfriend left me. That's all I knew about these characters. Part 3, riddles and games and other strange things. Lucy arrives on the island and she and Hugo remember each other. They basically just revisit everything that we already learned in the previous flashback from all those years ago. So I feel like the flashback was unnecessary because we revisited it twice. We had the flashback and then they discussed the flashback about everything that they did in the flashback. Something in this book just felt so off. It felt like it was slowly getting better, but it was so repetitive for such a short book. We constantly keep being told how much Lucy hated her childhood and now how much she so desperately wants to adopt Christopher. Oh, and I kept being like, yes, I know, I get it. Can we please give this character a different personality trait? Also, at this point in the book, the setup started to remind me of the exact same setup from the writing retreat, and that book was bonkers. We have the eccentric writer, the weird contest, the random group of contestants, this secluded house. But don't expect anything wild to happen in this book, though. Like the writing retreat, this book was very much pretty vanilla. So it seems this whole 5 days is going to be all riddles and etc. Basically, the person who reaches 10 points at the end of the week wins. The riddles we're told in the book do give the book this kind of like folksy, like cozy vibe. And if you like riddles, then this is probably a really good book for you. Unfortunately, I'm not a riddle fan. So we get our first riddle and Lucy wins. So she gets 2 points. And then oh my gosh, there is such a random plot point. So there is this lawyer who drove a boat or whatever to the island, and now he's going around individually to each of the contestants when they're like on their own and offering them a deal from his client where if they sell him the book, they'll get like all this money. It's so random. This never comes up again, but basically another contestant tries to get Lucy to cheat with him and then sell this book to this lawyer so they can split the money. She says no. The other contestant gets mad, Hugo overhears and then intervenes, and then the other contestant gets disqualified because any mention of cheating is against the rules. I don't really know why that section was in the book, maybe to show that they were being serious about like, hey, yo, don't cheat. So that's one extra contestant down, I guess. And that's why I didn't go into who the contestants were, because like, basically, it was just a plot device to cut. He wasn't even a plot device. Basically, like, she cut him out after like 100 pages of the book. So I don't even know. I feel like the more I talk about this book, the more I'm like, what did I read? Also, at this point in the book, the author is trying to really play up the romance aspect between Lucy and Hugo. Lucy keeps talking about how attractive she thinks Hugo is, and she keeps being like, is Hugo flirting with me? But it's not working for me. The whole they met when she was 13 and he was like in his 20s is just a little weird for me. Even if they did only speak for like 30 minutes back then, it just feels creepy to me. It just makes me feel a little icky, and I hated it, especially because like they very much remember the interaction. I mean, especially like, can you imagine like Hugo just being like, I remember when you were 13, you really grew up good. It's like, that just creeps me out. So by the end of this section, we've gone through more random riddles / games. We didn't actually like see very many of them. We saw another riddle, and then we had basically a paragraph that just kind of quickly described some other like riddles and contests and games or whatever that they had to play, like one being like Monopoly. So I'm glad I didn't have to read a whole like multiple pages about them playing Monopoly, but at the same time, like we just kind of like quickly are like, oh, you know, and then they played more games. So basically we are like halfway through, and at this point Lucy realizes that Jack is kind of making the contest be similar to the plots of his books. So she's like, what did the kids in the books have to do to get their wishes? First, they had to make a wish. Her wish is she wants Christopher. They had to get to Clock Island. After that, they answered riddles or played strange games. Then they had to face their fears. Was she afraid of anything? Anything other than failure? The next step for them is that they have to face their fears. But he says, this section in the contest isn't going to be worth any points. You guys just have to do it. And part 4 starts with a horrible fear of Lucy's, but it's not the fear that Jack was going for. Lucy gets a text from one of the teachers that Christopher is being placed in another foster home in a different school district. So she freaks out because she doesn't think that she's ever going to see him again. And she's like, well, I need to quit this contest. I need to go be with him. I must leave this island now. But there is a nasty storm outside, and it's like, yeah, no, girl, you're not going anywhere, which pisses her off because she's like, when I was a kid, my parents didn't care about me, and I need Christopher to know I care about him. And I'm like, girl, we know your parents were shit to you. You've been bringing it up every single chapter. Can we please tone it down with this narrative? Wanting to adopt a child and having a shitty childhood and having your character constantly talk about it is not giving your character personality or depth. I was so annoyed. I hated Lucy as a character by the end of this book. I was like, shut up. So Lucy goes to Hugo and was like, I need to get off this island. And Hugo tells Lucy a story to convince her to stay on the island, at least until the storm passes, so that she doesn't drown trying to go back to the mainland. So story time. We find out that Jack once called a child that wrote to him. The kid was in a really sad living situation. Anyways, Jack said to the child on the phone something about her coming to Clock Island. And like the other children in the story who are now contestants, she proceeded to go to Clock Island. All the other kids rode the ferry over and then basically snuck onto the island when the ferry stopped to deliver his mail. This day, there was no mail or no ferry going specifically to Jack's island. So the child, when the ferry was going next to the island, she jumped overboard and tried to swim to the island, and then she drowned. And Jack found her washed up on the shore. And then Jack had to do this whole like NDA like settlement with the family, which was also very bad because the family was shit to the kid. But basically they just got millions of dollars because she died trying to get to Jack's island. So that's what was very traumatizing for Jack and why he stopped writing all those years ago and why Hugo was living on the island to like keep an eye out on him, because that was a lot for Jack to process. I just found it so strange that so many kids were running away to Jack's island. I was so confused. Why is this island so easy for these children to get to? And could Jack just like stop implying to the children that they can go visit him on Clock Island? What? But this story gets Lucy to be like, okay, I'll stay so I don't accidentally drown trying to leave the island in this bad weather. So this section is wrapping up and we're about 200 pages in. Whew, at this point, I was so glad I had less than 100 pages to go because I was so over this book. So now Lucy's real fear Jack wants her to face is shock, talking to her sister. Saw that coming. We've been talking about it for 200 pages, how much she hates her sister. So sister comes to the island. They have a heart-to-heart. Sister says she's sorry for how everything went in their childhood. She says that she's like, well, you know, my childhood sucked too. So she says parents only paid attention to her when she was sick, and whenever she wasn't sick, the parents didn't care. And now she's like, I don't even talk to mom and dad anymore. Okay, so the chapter ends with there potentially being a future relationship for the sisters. Part 5, one last little question. This is the last part of the contest, and the way that the points were divvying out, whoever won this last question would win the book. So the question is very specific. One last little question for 5 points and to win the game. What 2 words appear on page 129 of the Secret of Clock Island paperback edition, copyright 2005? You have 5 minutes to answer and you cannot leave the room. Okay, so they all have their phones and they're allowed to phone a friend to try and find out the answer to this question. So Lucy calls Christopher because he has her copies of the books. By the way, this is a big breakthrough moment in the book for Christopher. He's afraid of ringing phones because when he found his parents dead from an overdose, the phone was ringing, so now he's terrified of ringing phones. But he sees it's Lucy's calling and he braves his trauma and answers the phone. But it's too late, and by the time Lucy gets the answer, which by the way is the words, I win, the timer has run out. Everyone loses the game, and the book, instead of going to one of the contestants, goes to the publisher. Oh, but don't you worry, there's still a happy ending. Jack just gives Lucy his house on the island for her and Chris to live in with him, and then Jack funds the adoption and uses his lawyers to help Lucy adopt Christopher. Okay, so Lucy gets everything she wants for nothing. It's nice to have a happy ending, I guess. It just felt so cheesy. It just felt like she got everything she wanted for no reason almost. Like she didn't win the contest to get the money to do these things on her own. Basically, like Jack just wanted to be nice, and so he just funded all of these things for Lucy. So I guess she got lucky. I don't know. It didn't really feel like she like accomplished anything to get these things that she wanted. And then in the last chapter, it's 3 months later. Lucy and Christopher are moving to the island. Hugo is also staying. Lucy is becoming Jack's sidekick, and they are working on nonprofit organizations that are now funded by Jack. So Lucy's living in his house, living on his island. He's basically just funding everything for her, and she's just kind of hanging out. It was phrased that Lucy is just kind of like Jack's daughter now, and Chris is his grandson. But also Jack also sees Hugo as his son, but Lucy and Hugo are starting to like have a relationship, it seemed. So I was just a bit put off. Like, Lucy, you don't actually know these men. We're all just gonna hang out on this like isolated island together for the rest of our days now. Oh, also, weird side note, at the end, it's just inserted that Lucy's sister is in the hospital now and she only has months to live. Fuck. This author needed a way to sneak in some misery into this happy ending because she loved talking about how sad the characters were all the time, and she can't let it be a complete happy ending, apparently. So clearly I had a lot of things I didn't like about this book. It just felt so flat to me. But the biggest thing is I don't think the author was very good at writing characters. She tried to give them all these miserable backstories, but in turn she basically made this the only thing that I knew about these characters. The book was also supposed to be about riddles and games that the contestants were going to play to get points, but there were only 2 riddles that were played out in the book, and then the rest of the games were mentioned very briefly in a short paragraph, summing up where they all were point-wise near the end. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, they are definitely playing games on this island like I promised in the synopsis of the book. Also, who labeled this book as fantasy or magical realism? There were no fantasy or magical aspects about this book. You know, it actually kind of like almost read as like a woman's fiction or chick lit, actually. So I just need to stop talking about this book. It's frustrating me. So I need to know, am I the only one who didn't like this book? Right now on Goodreads, it's highly rated and it seems to be getting like good response from readers. So am I just like an outlier here? I'm so curious. Let me know what you thought of this one down below. Also, as always, thanks so much for spending your time with me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next time. Bye.